Um, Here I am. Hi, everyone. Um, my name is Erica Hines, and I want to welcome you to our monthly LinkedIn Live that Black Women Thriving does every month to talk about how we can help employees thrive at work. Our tagline is When Black Women Thrive, We All Thrive. And we really believe in living into that tagline, and it definitely influences how we approach the way that we work with organizations. Um, Today, I want to talk to you about how can we thrive while leading. And I want a conversation. This could easily become a conversation that is tied up in like the academics of it, sort of talking about it from this very academic place. But I spent some time thinking about not only what I was finding out and doing my own research, continued research on thriving at work, but also really tying it to my own experience. So, as we're having this conversation today, um, everything that I suggest doing is something that I actually do. And my hope is that for those of you who sit in leadership positions, Black women who sit in leadership positions, uh, not Black women who sit in leadership positions, that the information that I give you some part of it will resonate and give you some, uh, the word oomph comes to mind to how you can begin to practice thriving in your own daily work. So, with that, let's go ahead and get started. Um, as I thought about this, I thought of how what was inspiring me to talk about this particular topic. And what really fueled this was both the research that came out of Black Women Thriving, but also the anecdotal experience that I've had as a Black woman and that I have witnessed in other Black women. And that is that I've seen a lot of leaders uh, across sectors who find themselves in what I have been calling a survival loop. And the pattern of that is all too familiar. Um, and that is that I see leaders who are put in a place where they're supposed to hold it all together for themselves and for their teams, for the mission of their organizations, or for the goal of their group, or for the bottom line of their organizations, but not for themselves. So they're supposed to hold everything together for the good of these other sort of priorities, but not for themselves. And here's what I believe, based upon my own experience, as well as based upon what the research says, which is that too many of us have been taught to earn our survival at work. I've said this in a few lives, um, and I don't think that me saying this is something that would be isn't radical. I think it's I think it's definitely true right now, which is that as far as workplaces go, I think that a lot of employees are being taught or being put in positions to survive at work. And I mean that mentally and physically, psychologically, and in some cases financially. Um, and for those of us who have been put in that position, um, we're lucky if we ever get to think about how we can flourish at work. Um, for most of us, we start to think about, well, how can I thrive? We don't get to have that discussion until Thursday or Thursday evening, because the pattern that we're in is, you know what? I'm going to take the weekend um, to recover and then refill my cup back up so that I can then just deplete it over the course of the next week. That is the loop that we have been in ever since I've been in the workplace, which is now almost 30 years. Um, and as a person and as a company and as the founder of a company, um, I think what's become increasingly clear to me is that we can't cultivate this idea of thriving, this idea of having a sense of being energetic about our work, feeling like we're learning positive, we're positively learning things at work, feeling as though we have um, uh, autonomy, feeling as though we feel connected to our work. We can't do that as leaders if we're not actually experiencing that in our own professional lives. So, um, I'm going to spend a little bit of time trying to disrupt that for you all and help. I'm going to do that gently, but hopefully clearly for you, and with hopefully the tone of being that like gentle coach by your side, but the coach who's definitely saying like, maybe examine this and do a little bit of changing. So, um, with that in mind, I want to talk to you about the first. I want to tell you um, what traits. What are the traits that leaders who are thriving at work actually have? Um, and so, overall, leaders who are thriving at work, and by that, thriving is what I mean. I'm going to reiterate what I mean when I say thriving, which is that like they're experiencing a state of feeling as though they are thriving at work. It's a psychological state. Um, and so there are 8 sort of personal practices that that research outside of the Black Women Thriving research has said are important to becoming a thriving leader. And they are prioritizing well-being and boundaries. So leaders would protect their energy by setting and modeling clear limits on their time, how they communicate, and workload. Um, the second is that they would commit to self-development. So these are leaders that would invest in their own growth, reflecting, learning, and actively seeking out new skills or insights. I'm going to read through these, and I know that if someone is like watching this afterwards, or even if you're watching it now, you're like, these all sound very idyllic. Idealistic, actually, is what the word that I'm thinking of. This is an ideal state, right? And even as I'm reading, and I am reading these because there's 8, and I couldn't remember all those in my brain. Um, the goal here is not for you to seek like even as you're thinking about these, that you think about this as a need to be perfect, but really to think like, oh, which one of these applies to me, and where do I have an interest in improving my thriving? So we just talked about committing to self development. The third and the fourth ones are thriving leaders have a sense of being grounded and having inner knowledge that they rely on. So that's that gut instinct, that spidey sense, that sort of touchstone that you're able to go like, oh, I don't know that this feels right. Um, that is something that leaders who are thriving have. Uh, they also have, oh, as I said, integrity and balanced judgment, um, which is that thriving leaders generally try to infuse their decision making um, with some sort of alignment to their values. Yes, they can do that even while they need to make an urgent decision, but it is one where they will do a gut check around the values and ask themselves, uh, is this reasonable and is it aligned with the personal values that I have, or also like the values of this team or the values of this organization? Um, Thriving leaders will also be proactive and um, tr- have a sense of autonomy about the work that they're doing. And they will take ownership over not only their work, but like themselves, their being, how they show up, um, and really try to model that for their teams. The final three things that, and we will, uh, what we are going to do is we're going to take these eight and put them in to a PDF. And if you sign up to be a member of our Thrive Hive, um, we will in the future make sure that you get this set of eight. So, uh, the last three things that I want to talk about is that thriving leaders will foster positive emotions and optimism. Like they will take a moment to celebrate wins, they'll take a moment to actually look at a challenge and have some perspective and ask others for their perspectives about challenges. Um, and also in this, in being a thriving leader, they'll also take the time to to uh, give situations some perspective. So even when something is hard or difficult that's happening at their organizations, they won't fall into the sky is falling. You know, ideally, what they would do is they would say, yes, this is bad, or I can see where you're having difficulty with this, or this is a difficult time, and here's the reasons why, and here's uh, how I think that we can handle it. And the final two things that thriving leaders would have is that they value diversity, equity, and inclusion, both on their team and in their organization, because they see that as a positive inside of their organizations. Um, and they would also routinely connect the work of their teams to a higher purpose or make meaning out of what their teams are working on. So they would reflect on how their work links to the organization's values or the bottom line. Um, but then they would also be adept enough to um, help themselves and their teams to find some amount of meaning in the work that they do, so that they can actually feel like a positive relationship to it. So, those are the eight ways. Now, again, I know I just went over a lot. What I want to focus on and give you a little bit more insight into, I chose, um, and what I'm sort of doing here is thinking in real time. I actually had three that I was going to cover, but I even think that's too much. So I'm actually going to go in depth into two of these and tell you how I, as a leader who is practicing thriving all the time, just as much as she is trying to help others, both individually and organizationally, to thrive, how I practice some of these. So I want to take a moment to talk about groundedness and inner knowing. And I want to come at it from the vantage point of talking about the fact that I don't think that being grounded and trusting your uh, inner gut is something that's woo-woo anymore. And I don't think it's been woo-woo for about 25 years. With the explosion of talking about emotional intelligence, and frankly, like the entire industry that's been built around that, uh, EQ and being grounded in your decision making is something that's like secondhand in terms of being a good manager, being a good leader. Um, and so this idea that I am connecting, which is that in order to experience that state of thriving, that part of that as a leader is to continually try to, make sure that you are grounding yourself, um, and staying grounded in terms of how you're leading. Um, that should not be new to you. And it also should be something that uh, isn't considered a soft skill, or isn't considered like a nice to have. Like at this point, it's been proven that it's a need to have in terms of being a leader. So for me, um, as a leader and also as a Black woman, I think about this a lot. For me, the idea of feeling grounded and having an inner knowing is also somewhat of a uh, ability to um, the is it ability to sort of like protect my values, and how I want to show up. So a few practices that I do are, one of them is, yes, I do breath work to ground myself. Like if I'm in a situation, even with clients or uh, a meeting or conflict, like I will do that breath work of, grounding myself and noticing. The one that I do is like the five things. So, what can you see, smell, hear, uh, feel, like, tangibly, tactilely touch. That's what I meant. So that's one of the ways that I will ground myself and sort of like come back to myself in a situation that's like forcing me or feeling like I'm being forced to like leave where I am, sort of mentally. I'll also write out a few sentences to explain what's happening in real time. Just to even put it out on paper means that like I'm able to take it outside of myself and like look at it or put it away to deal with later. So that's another way that I sort of ground myself and think about like, okay, how can I stay present? Because that's really what this is about. How can I stay present in this situation? And the final thing is, I don't know how many of you watched West Wing. It was on a long time ago, but still a great show. And I'll do my own little walk and talk where I'm just like kind of allowing myself to let those to let the voices that are in my head that are sort of telling me like, well, you could do this and what about this and consider this, like to actually give those voice outside of me, um, and use that as a way to check in with my gut. Uh, and my heart, right? So sometimes I will actually do a walk and talk where I'm sort of just like letting myself sort of verbalize those things. And for me, that's really helpful because it means that I'm not sort of just allowing the thoughts that are taking me away from being grounded and are really kind of interrupting my inner knowing. It allows me to kind of look at them outside of myself. And the thing that I want to say about this in terms of being thriving leaders and what I just said to you is like, none of these practices that I just stated right here are things that I do for like 30 minutes. I usually do them for like 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And if I have 5 minutes, like I take that long. Um, but I allow myself, and it's not even allowing, it's like I can either choose to not be grounded, which is not a good feeling for me, or I can choose to do something to ground myself. And when I intentionally just make sure that I take that time to do that, it allows me to then sit down and come back to a situation. Um, and as I'm talking about this, I think it is occurring to me that I could be talking about this, and you could be thinking, like, this is only in times of conflict. It's not. It's really anytime I feel there's not sort of certain conditions that are have to be in play for me to like use these tactics that I'm just talking to you about. So, groundedness doesn't necessarily make the chaos that you might feel like you're working in disappear. But what it does is that it takes me from then, or it could take you from becoming an active part of that chaos and making it bigger or worse than it needs to be. Um, and instead allowing you to sort of come back to how do we handle that chaos. So, one question that I would have for you, if you happen to be watching this, is to ask yourselves, um, what is your practice that helps you stay centered um, in situations where things feel urgent or they don't feel urgent? Um, and so I think if you think about that, the answers might be very interesting to you. The final piece of our linked this time that I want to share with you is in going a little bit deeper into um, purpose and meaning, and having an having an honest conversation based upon my years of being involved with work that is mission aligned. Um, and so, what I want to say about it, about purpose and meaning and why it's important to thriving, is because uh, if people feel when people feel like they're thriving, they feel as though they are doing something that is worthwhile, right? And worthwhile can is very subjective, but if we are in the business of promoting people feeling as though they're flourishing at work, so that it helps us, right, as leaders, as business owners, et cetera, so that it helps our bottom line of what we're trying to do, then we do have to spend some time making meaning for them. But what I want to say about this particular topic is that a lot of times when we're talking about like making sure that people find purpose in their work and making sure that people feel as though they have meaning in their work, is that we can talk about it so much that it becomes a goal, and it becomes an unrealistic goal for folks. Um, I think in my experience of all these years, I have seen organizations be completely set up where they're like, only the mission matters, only the bottom line matters, and nothing else matters. And what that can do for everyone who works inside of that organization is that it displaces their own meaning and personhood inside of that organization. And here's what I mean by that. When you are working in an organization or in a department where people are like, nothing else matters but the bottom line or the mission of this organization, that's another pressure. Um, it's another place where we're asking people perform above all else in order to make this thing over here happen. And in the process of doing that, put everything else aside, your well being, your health, um, your priorities, your everything to meet this. That, number one, is a form of survival thinking. And two, that does not help people to thrive. Um, as much as I talk about thriving at work, what I am very clear on is that our labor is not meant to give us the ultimate meaning in our lives. As much as I love thinking about thriving at work is and really care about the work that I do, like this is one part of my meaning in life. It really is. And I probably have work to do in those other areas, but at least I'm aware of those areas. So when we are trying to talk, or when I'm giving you the advice to help people make meaning, I want you to right size their relationship to purpose, to the purpose of your organizations, to the purpose of like making sure that their work is meaningful. Because when we don't, what we're doing is we're like chasing, we're putting people in the position of constantly like chasing and trying to meet the mission of the organization to the point that we're asking them to willingly not take care of themselves. And that's not the way this works. So, what I would say about this is that as we're thinking about being thriving leaders, as we're thinking about modeling that for our teams and our organizations, that we really need to do some thinking about how we talk about meaning and purpose making, um, but having it have some perspective and having it have, you know, some um, some guardrails around it. Because when we do that, I think we're actually leaning and modeling boundaries. That's what I meant to say. We as leaders are leaning into the boundaries and the realistic lives of both ourselves and our team members. So, um, how I would close this out is by saying to you, um, as you think about how you can thrive as a leader, or if you wanted to take on or think about some of the practices that I just spoke about, um, I'd ask you to think about the following. Um, and maybe this is over the course of like the next 7 days. Think about a decision that you're making and ask, does it reflect your values? And it doesn't have to be all your values, but at least one of your values. And check in with that like inner knowing uh, part of yourself and your gut. Ask yourselves about some decision or action or conversation that you're going to have. Is this how I want to show up in the world? Is this how I want to show up as a leader? And the final question that I would ask you to ask yourselves is, how can I find my own clarity and meaning in this work within the work itself? And how do I make sure that I'm checking on that meaning every day so that it becomes bite-sized and digestible? Okay. Again, what I believe to be true about thriving at work through teaching myself about it, researching it, doing our own research at Black Women Thriving is that um, we can actually begin to, as individuals and as teams and as organizations, we can begin to thrive even during times like these, even during chaos. But it's an intentional choice. Um, and it's something that we have to think about and commit to the shift. I'll close by saying if this conversation that you're watching resonated with you, um, come join us in our free uh, subscription called Thrive Hive, where we spend time and send out information and tools, many tools. This could be a mini tool in itself that maybe we will package up that really are going to help you think about your own thriving and also how you can promote that thriving amongst the folks that work with you and for you. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We'll be back next month with a whole new topic, and appreciate you being willing to help yourself and others thrive.